My name is Walter Grayson. I'm 76 years old, a retired stonemason from Lawrence, Kansas. I built this house with my own hands in 1982, every brick laid, every nail hammered by me. Back then, it was just me, my wife Elaine, and our little girl Joanna. The lot was cheap, the land soft, the winters harsh, but I didn't care. We didn't have much, but we had plans, and this house was the center of them. It wasn't just a roof or walls. It was where birthdays happened, where the backyard smelled of burgers and charcoal, where Elaine would sing to the radio while making pie, and where Joanna would run through the sprinkler in her Easter dress just to see her mother gasp and laugh. It was never a mansion, but over the years, as new paint came and went, new plants bloomed and withered, and the roof creaked with age, it became something deeper than just property. It became proof of a life built by love, hard work, and repetition. Elaine passed 6 years ago. Stroke. Sudden. I found her in the kitchen, halfway between the fridge and the stove, a tub of margarine still in her hand. Just like that. Here, then gone. The ambulance came quickly, but there was nothing to be done. I stood on the front porch watching the paramedics roll her away, and I remember thinking, this house is too quiet now. It's not made for one. In the weeks after her passing, I thought about selling many times. The house was too large, the heating bills too high, the yard too demanding. But every time I got close to calling a realtor, I'd open a drawer and find one of Elaine's recipe cards, or smell her perfume faintly on the pillow, and I couldn't do it. I didn't want a condo. I didn't want senior living. I wanted familiar floors under my feet, and the same sun filtering through the same windows we'd chosen together in '82. The silence hurt, but I wore it like a second skin. For a time, Joanna visited every couple of weeks, bringing over a store-bought pie or a new photo of my grandson, Cody. She would always talk about work, how hard things were, how expensive everything had become, how stressed she and Ethan, her husband, were. I listened. That's what fathers do. I didn't say much, just nodded, offered coffee, warmed up whatever casserole I'd made too much of. I knew she didn't enjoy being in the house, said it smelled like old paper and old memories. But she came until she didn't. Then the calls stopped. I left messages, got no reply. Birthdays came and went. Holidays passed. When I called Cody to congratulate him on making honor roll, he sounded surprised I even knew. That was 3 years ago, and then, just like that 2 years ago, she called me out of the blue. "Dad," she said, "we need a place to stay. Just for a while." There'd been a foreclosure. Ethan's business had collapsed. The economy, they said. Cody's school was still in the district, and they didn't want to uproot him. Could they move in? Just for 6 months, maybe less. I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said. "Bring whatever you need." I cleared out the guest room. I even fixed the leaky shower. I was glad, not just to help, but because for the first time in years there'd be voices in the house again. And for a while, it was good. Cody, already a teenager, barely spoke to me, but he was polite enough. Ethan mostly kept to himself, always glued to his laptop in the den. Joanna tried to be warm. She cooked a few meals, reorganized the kitchen, badly, I thought, but I didn't complain. I was grateful for company. The silences shrank a little. We watched TV together sometimes. I stopped going to bed right after dinner. But months passed, then a year, then 2. And the temporary stay started to feel like a quiet occupation. Little things changed. My old recliner disappeared from the living room. "It's too bulky," Joanna said. "We're trying to keep it minimal." Elaine's paintings were taken down and replaced with abstract modern pieces, Joanna said made the room feel lighter. One day I came home from the pharmacy to find my old tools in the garage boxed up, labeled, "Donate." "You're not using them anymore, Dad," she said when I protested. "Why let them gather dust?" It was hard to argue with, but something about it felt like erasure, like someone slowly repainting a memory until nothing of the original was visible. Even the dinner table changed. We used to say, "Grace." Elaine always led it. A quiet pause before eating, but now it was rush and noise, cell phones buzzing, Cody watching something with earbuds in. When I asked if we could eat in silence, just once a week, Joanna laughed. "We're not in the 50s anymore, Dad." I didn't push, but I stopped joining them most evenings, quietly microwaving my meal and eating in the breakfast nook alone. And still, I didn't say anything. It was my house, but I had begun to feel like a guest. No one told me what was happening. Things just disappeared, changed, adjusted. My coffee maker was replaced with some sleek European machine I didn't know how to use. My bathroom towels were replaced with thinner, color-matching ones that didn't dry properly. My newspaper subscription was canceled. "Everything's online now," Ethan said. "No need to waste paper." But I liked my paper. I liked ink on my fingers. I liked circling the crossword with a pen and reading obituaries like Elaine used to. It wasn't about news, it was about ritual. I asked once about when they planned to move into a new place. Ethan said, "Soon." Joanna said nothing. Cody didn't even look up. That was the moment, I think, when it truly sank in. They weren't planning to leave. I was no longer the host. I was being tolerated in my own home, but I still told myself it would pass. Maybe if Ethan found another job. Maybe if Cody graduated early. Maybe they'd find something affordable, and I'd have my quiet back. Maybe. But then came the night at dinner. The night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday night in early March, the kind of evening when the Kansas wind howls low through the cracks in old window panes and makes the trees groan against the eaves. The thermostat was stuck at 70, but the corners of the house still breathed a quiet chill that always made Elaine pull on her thick wool cardigan, the one with the wooden buttons and the smell of dryer sheets. And I guess out of habit I still wore mine too. Dinner was roast chicken, green beans, and boxed mashed potatoes. Joanna's doing. She'd found a new marinade recipe online and was proud of it, describing each step with the confidence of someone who'd learned to cook by watching influencers instead of family. Ethan said little as usual, preoccupied with something on his phone, and Cody sat to my left, earbud in one ear, stabbing at his food with the bored indifference only 17-year-olds could perfect. I had poured myself a glass of lemonade, the homemade kind I liked. Tart, pulpy, not that pre-sweetened nonsense, and offered it to Cody, who refused with a half-muttered, "I'm good." There was no grace, no clinking of glasses, no small talk. Just the scrape of cutlery and the humming undertone of a house no longer mine. Halfway through the meal, Cody reached for the salt shaker, and in doing so, knocked over his glass of water. The cup clattered against his plate, sending water across the tablecloth and dripping into my lap. I let out a short gasp, more from the cold than anything else, and instinctively pushed back from the table. The reaction wasn't dramatic. I didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't accuse. I just looked at him and said, in a voice perhaps a bit firmer than necessary, "You might say excuse me when you spill something, son. That used to be the polite thing to do at dinner." It was a sentence pulled from 100 similar moments from the past, the kind of thing any father or grandfather might say without malice. A reflex of discipline, a simple call to basic respect, or perhaps even a subconscious grasp for a time when such manners were second nature. Joanna froze with her fork halfway to her mouth, her eyes locking onto mine like I'd just spoken something sacrilegious. Cody muttered, "Sorry," without meeting my eyes and reached for a paper towel, but Joanna's face had gone red. Not with embarrassment, not with concern, but with heat, with rage. She slammed her fork down hard enough to rattle the silverware, stood up so quickly her chair scraped back against the wood floor with a sharp, violent screech, and glared at me like I had just insulted her in front of strangers. "You know what, Dad?" she snapped, her voice shrill and sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "If you're going to keep acting like this, criticizing everything, making everyone uncomfortable in this house, then maybe it's time you started paying rent, or maybe you should just leave." The room went silent. Ethan looked up from his phone, his mouth slightly open, as if even he hadn't expected that outburst. Cody sat frozen, the paper towel in his hand soaked and crumpled, staring at his mother as if she'd grown a second head. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her right. I felt my ears ringing like the air had been sucked out of the room. My hands, wet from the spilled water, began to tremble. Not from the cold, not from age, but from something deeper. Shame. Humiliation. The kind of sting that starts in the chest and works its way outward, turning your skin raw. I looked at Joanna, my daughter, the baby girl whose knee I once bandaged, who I taught to ride a bike, whose crayon drawings I'd once hung proudly on the refrigerator. She was standing over me now, arms crossed, eyes full of contempt. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice low, more incredulous than angry. "You heard me," she snapped again, still standing. "This is our home now, too. And, frankly, the way you've been acting, sulking around, judging everyone, treating Cody like a criminal for being a teenager, it's exhausting. You either start contributing like the rest of us, or you find somewhere else to live." We've been more than patient. It was the word "our" that caught me. Our home, as if the title deed had shifted in the night. As if the decades of mortgage payments, of pipe repairs, of hauling drywall and laying tile, as if all of that had dissolved into irrelevance the moment she moved back in with her problems and her assumptions. I stared at her and realized in that moment that something fundamental had shifted. There was no coming back from this. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, not a moment of stress or frustration. It was truth. Her truth. She no longer saw herself as a guest or a daughter or someone temporarily in need. She saw herself as an owner, as a keeper of rules, as someone entitled to dictate terms under my roof. Ethan cleared his throat. "Joanna," he said gently, but she cut him off. "No, I'm serious. He's been making this house toxic for months. Always with the sighs, the side comments, the back-in-my-day crap. I'm sick of it." She turned back to me. "I've been patient. I've taken care of you. We've taken care of you. But we can't keep living like this." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't know which ones would matter anymore. I wanted to say that I hadn't asked for care, that I'd kept the lights on, paid the property taxes, maintained the lawn, and made every mortgage payment until it was mine. And mine alone. I wanted to say that I'd welcomed them, fed them, given them safety and space and silence in their time of need. But somehow they had rewritten the story. And in their version, I was the dependent, the burden, the dead weight dragging them down. Joanna didn't sit back down. She picked up her plate, walked it to the sink, dumped the rest of her chicken in the garbage, and rinsed it clean. As if the conversation had ended. As if nothing more needed to be said. "Dinner's over," she muttered, not to anyone in particular, and walked out of the room. Ethan followed a few moments later, silent, hands in his pockets. Cody gave me a glance, unreadable, somewhere between pity and guilt, and stood up too, mumbling something about homework. I remained seated for a long time. The water on my slacks had dried, leaving a faint mark. The food was cold. The room was darker now, the overhead lights not quite enough to keep the shadows at bay. And for the first time since Elaine died, I felt like I didn't just live in a lonely house. I lived in a house that no longer wanted me. I sat at the table long after they had gone upstairs, staring at the half-empty glass of lemonade and the reflection of my own tired face in the darkened kitchen window. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat, the words echoing in my mind on a loop that wouldn't stop. Pay rent or leave. The next morning began like any other, though the silence in the house felt newly sharpened, like something cold pressed against the skin. I got up before dawn, as I usually did, fixed myself some oatmeal the way Elaine used to, with cinnamon and too much butter, and sat alone in the breakfast nook, watching the sky lighten through the half-drawn blinds. Upstairs I heard the dull rhythm of footsteps, the thump of water pipes, and Cody's music leaking faintly through the ceiling. But no one came down. No one joined me. It was as if dinner the night before had sealed me off from the rest of the house, like a door quietly but permanently clicked shut. I washed my bowl, left the spoon in the sink, and went out to the porch. The wind was sharp, pulling dry leaves across the driveway in scattered clusters. It looked like it might snow later, though the sky wasn't ready to commit. I sat on the porch swing that Ethan once called a relic, its chains creaking under my weight, and wondered how long I had left before they tried to remove it too. Around noon, I tried to find Joanna to ask about the internet password. They had recently changed it without telling me. But she wasn't in the house. I knocked on her door and waited, then peeked inside. The room was a curated showroom of someone else's life. Clothes folded in unfamiliar ways, lotions and glass bottles on a dresser that once held Elaine's framed photo, which was now gone. The house was still physically mine, but spiritually it had been evacuated of me. My things had been replaced, my routines erased. I went to the garage needing to feel something that was still mine, and pulled open the cabinet where I used to keep my tools. What I found was a set of labeled bins: donate, trash, and misc. Inside were my old socket wrenches, my late father's level, the wooden toolbox Elaine gave me for our 5th anniversary. Everything was in the donate bin. I stood there a long time, looking at the splinters of my life organized like useless debris. When Joanna came back, I met her at the door and asked why my tools had been boxed. She shrugged, not unkindly, but with a casualness that stunned me. "You haven't used them in years, Dad. We thought it was time to make space. Cody needs somewhere to store his weights." I almost laughed. My tools, my garage, now secondary to a teenager's half-hearted fitness phase. I didn't argue, but something in me pulled back, like a gate closing slowly. That night, they didn't call me for dinner. I stayed in my room and ate a cold sandwich listening to the muffled sound of the conversation downstairs. Laughter, TV, clinking plates. I could make out words like finally and boundaries and peace, though I couldn't be sure. And I didn't want to ask. The next few days brought more small humiliations. The thermostat was set to 68. "To save money," Ethan said. And when I tried to raise it, I found they'd installed a passcode lock. I asked Joanna for it, and she told me she'd handle it if it got too cold. My newspaper, which I still subscribed to despite their repeated mockery, was no longer arriving. I called the distributor, who told me the cancellation had been requested by someone named J. Grayson. When I confronted Joanna, she said, "It's outdated, Dad. You can read all the same news online. There's no reason to waste money on print." But it wasn't about the news. It was about sitting with my coffee and ink-stained fingers and pretending for 15 minutes a day that the world hadn't moved past me entirely. Then there was the matter of Elaine's things. I kept most of her clothes in the hall closet, not because I was holding on, but because I didn't want to pretend she never existed. Her winter coat, the blue one with the velvet collar, still hung near mine. I noticed it was missing one morning and found it stuffed in a garbage bag labeled donation. Joanna looked surprised when I brought it to her. "Oh, that old thing? I didn't think you'd notice. It's been 6 years, Dad. Maybe it's time you started moving on." I didn't respond. I just took the coat and returned it to the closet. Later that evening, I moved it into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Something had changed in my posture after that. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped asking for things. I began, instead, to observe. One afternoon, Ethan's car was gone and Joanna was out shopping, so I walked into the living room, a place I had avoided since they rearranged it, and stood for a long time surveying the walls. Every trace of Elaine was gone. The cross-stitch she made in '89, the family photo from Christmas in Branson, even the little wooden clock she loved, all gone. In their place were abstract canvases, cold and colorless, and a metal sculpture that looked like a twisted coat hanger. I turned on the TV, hoping for noise, and was greeted by a streaming account I didn't recognize. My saved shows were gone. My settings, deleted. New profile, guest, greeted me in bold letters. I didn't watch anything. I just turned it off and sat on the couch that had once held all three of us, me, Elaine, and Joanna, wrapped in a quilt, watching Wheel of Fortune and shouting answers like it mattered. That night, I overheard Joanna and Ethan talking in the kitchen. I was in the hallway, not hiding exactly, but standing quietly in the shadows as they poured wine and whispered like teenagers plotting mischief. "I don't think he's going to budge," Ethan said. "He's stubborn. He thinks we owe him something just because he built this place." Joanna's voice was lower. "Well, he does owe us. We've been patient. We've taken care of him. And he still treats this place like it's his kingdom. Maybe it's time we made things official." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked. "We can't just kick him out." There was a pause. Then Joanna said, "No, but we can make him want to leave." I backed away before they noticed me, heart pounding. So it was intentional. The thermostat, the newspaper, the disappearance of my belongings. It wasn't carelessness. It was a campaign. They wanted the house. They wanted me gone. And they wanted to push me out slowly enough that they could still look righteous doing it. That night I sat in my room, door locked, staring at the blue coat on the chair and the envelope on my nightstand. The one with the original deed and tax records I kept tucked away in case of emergencies. I pulled out the papers and read them slowly, the way Elaine and I had all those years ago when we first signed them. My name was still there, alone, undivided. No co-owner, no amendment. Just me, Walter Grayson. Owner. And in that moment, for the first time in a long while, something inside me reawakened. A sense of quiet fury. Not the kind that erupts, the kind that sharpens. The kind that remembers what it means to be a man who built things with his own hands. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They mistook silence for surrender. But they had forgotten something. This house was not their inheritance. It was not a favor. It was not a shared space or a compromise. It was mine. And now, it would become a weapon. The next morning, I left the house before anyone else was awake. I didn't want to answer questions, didn't want to explain where I was going, and truth be told, I wasn't even sure myself what I planned to do. I only knew I couldn't stay idle anymore, waiting for them to corner me into obedience. I took the old Ford, the one they rarely used anymore, and drove to the other end of town to visit Harold Kinney, my longtime friend and the attorney who handled the paperwork when Elaine and I first purchased the house. We hadn't spoken in months, not since his retirement, but when I called and told him I had a question about property law, his voice warmed instantly and he said, "Come over any time." His house was the same as I remembered. Same porch swing, same ivy. Crawling up the trellis, same faint scent of tobacco from his pipe even though he quit smoking 5 years ago. We sat at his kitchen table, and I laid out the deed, the tax records, and explained everything. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. Harold listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his eyes narrowing as the story unfolded, especially when I told him about the thermostat lock, the newspaper cancellation, and Joanna's outburst at dinner. When I finally fell silent, he leaned back, tapped the corner of the deed, and said, "They're trying to force your hand, Walter. That much is obvious, but legally, you're in the clear. The property is solely in your name. They have no rights here. You could evict them tomorrow if you wanted." That word, evict, sat strangely in the air. I wasn't looking for revenge, and I wasn't interested in dragging my daughter and her family through legal mud, but I had to face what had become undeniably true. They were no longer here out of gratitude or need. They were here with a sense of entitlement, with a strategy, and most painfully, with contempt. I asked Harold what my options were, assuming I didn't want to press charges or involve courts just yet. He scratched his chin, his fingers drumming the table slowly. "If you wanted to sell the house, you could do it outright. No permissions needed. List it, show it, close it. They'd have 30 days to vacate after the sale. Of course, they could fight it, but they wouldn't have a leg to stand on. That's the cleanest route." I nodded, not saying anything. The idea felt radical and oddly liberating. Sell the house I built, the house Elaine made into a home, the house they now treated like their kingdom. On the drive back, I passed the diner where Elaine and I used to go every Saturday after church. I hadn't been there in years, but something pulled me to stop. I sat in our usual booth by the window, ordered the same pancakes and bacon she used to love, and stared at the steam curling up from the coffee. And I thought about what this house had become. Not a place of memories, but of siege. Not a sanctuary, but a battlefield. I had been holding on to it like it was sacred, but perhaps sacred things need to be protected, not clung to blindly. Maybe honoring Elaine didn't mean keeping the same walls around me until the day I died, slowly shrinking under the pressure of others' convenience. Maybe it meant choosing peace, even if it came wrapped in change. When I returned home, there was a note on the kitchen counter, scribbled in Joanna's quick, clipped handwriting, "Please remember to use coasters. The dining table is real oak and we've already had some water rings. Jay." I stared at it, then folded it once and placed it in the trash. Upstairs, I heard her on a Zoom call, her voice bouncing confidently through whatever pitch she was delivering. Ethan was in the backyard, raking leaves I never asked him to rake. Cody was nowhere to be seen. I walked quietly into my bedroom, pulled out the yellow legal pad I kept in the drawer, and began making a list. Step 1. Contact a realtor. Step 2. Retrieve all documents and store them off-site. Step 3. Secure finances. Step 4. Do it quietly. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened the laptop they'd gifted me last Christmas, a clunky, overcomplicated machine that I never really took to, and searched for local real estate agents. I found a woman named Valerie Tran, with good reviews and a reputation for discretion. I sent a short inquiry, just enough to open a door. Then I shut the laptop, turned off the light, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling not anxious, not sad, but resolved. I thought of Elaine, of the way she used to say, "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't fighting, it's leaving with your dignity." I knew she'd understand. I think in some quiet way, she'd have done the same. 2 days later, Valerie called me back, her voice brisk and professional, but not without a note of warmth that made me feel, for the first time in months, like I wasn't just some aging man fumbling with decisions too large for him. She said she had received my inquiry and wanted to set up a discreet meeting, assuring me she understood the sensitivity of my situation and had worked with older clients who were in similar conflicts with family members over property. We arranged to meet at her office, a modest place tucked in a strip mall across from a grocery store, and I drove there on a Wednesday morning when Joanna thought I was at the pharmacy. Valerie was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 40s. Sharp-eyed, with a crisp navy suit and a directness that reminded me of Elaine in her working years as a school secretary, the kind of directness that wastes no time on flattery, because clarity is a form of respect. I laid out the situation. My daughter, her husband, their son, their slow transformation of my house into something I no longer recognized, and the outburst at dinner that had finally made me realize the house was no longer a home. Valerie listened closely, took notes, asked precise questions, and when I was done, she tapped her pen against her notepad and said, "Mr. Grayson, you are the sole legal owner of this property. That gives you complete control. If you wish to sell, you can. They cannot stop you. They may resist, but the law is on your side. The key is timing and how much discretion you want. We can list quietly. We can prearrange buyers who specialize in fast closings, and we can make sure that when the hammer falls, it falls decisively." I walked out of her office with a mixture of dread and exhilaration, a sense that a line had been crossed and the path ahead could no longer be undone. Back home, Joanna was waiting in the kitchen with her arms crossed. "Where were you?" she asked, her tone accusatory as though I were a teenager out past curfew. I said calmly that I had been running errands, nothing more. She narrowed her eyes but said nothing, only muttered something under her breath about communication, and stormed off. That night, at dinner, she announced loudly that boundaries were necessary in this house, that everyone should start contributing equally, and she suggested we set up a family account for shared expenses. Ethan nodded along dutifully, though he barely looked at me, and Cody kept his eyes on his plate. I didn't respond, not yet, but I felt the weight of the deed in my pocket like a silent counter-argument to everything she said. The days that followed brought sharper blows. My recliner, which had already been moved to the garage, was suddenly gone altogether. When I asked, Joanna said she had arranged for a donation pickup. "It was falling apart, Dad. No one needed that eyesore. You should thank me for freeing up space." I stood in the empty corner of the living room, staring at the blank spot where I had spent countless evenings with Elaine, and said nothing, because I knew if I opened my mouth, my anger would spill in ways I might not be able to contain. Later, I went into the garage and found not only the recliner gone, but also several boxes of Elaine's old cookbooks missing. When I confronted Ethan about it, he shrugged and said Joanna told him to put them on the curb for pickup. "They were moldy anyway," he added, as if that excused it. What cut deepest, however, was what happened with Cody. I had always thought of him as distant, but basically good-hearted, a boy caught in the whirl of modern distractions who still had some gentleness buried under the layers of teenage detachment. One evening, after Joanna scolded me for leaving a light on in the basement, "Do you have any idea what electricity costs these days?" she said, though I had paid every bill since they moved in. I overheard Cody in his room, speaking to a friend on the phone. His voice carried through the vent. "Yeah, my mom's trying to get rid of him. She says he's losing it. Honestly, it'd be easier if he just left. He's always in the way, and the house would be ours, basically. We could finally fix it up." I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, my chest tightening as though someone had wound a rope around it. My grandson, the boy I had carried on my shoulders through county fairs, the boy I had bought toy trains for every Christmas, the boy who once fell asleep against my chest while I read him stories, now saw me as an obstacle, a nuisance, a barrier. Between him and what he thought of as his inheritance, it wasn't even about family anymore, it was about property, about ownership, about possession, and I was the problem. The next morning, I drove back to Valerie's office with the papers and told her I was ready. I wanted the house appraised, listed, and prepared for sale as quickly as possible. She looked at me carefully, as though weighing whether I was acting out of anger or reason, and when she seemed satisfied that my decision was settled, she said she would arrange everything. She asked if I wanted to inform Joanna and Ethan first. I told her no. They would find out when the process was already too far along to stop. Valerie nodded, understanding the necessity of surprise. When I came home that evening, Joanna was waiting again, this time with a bank brochure in her hand. "We need to add your accounts to a joint arrangement," she said, her voice firm but almost rehearsed. "It'll make things easier in case something happens. You're not getting any younger. What if you forget to pay a bill? What if you make a mistake? We can handle things for you." She slid the brochure toward me, tapping the line where it explained convenient joint access. I pushed it back. No, I said simply. Her face hardened instantly. Why not? We're only trying to help. Do you think we're out to get you? I looked at her and said with all the calm I could muster, I don't think. I know. For the first time in years, Joanna was speechless. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. 2 days later, Valerie came by for the appraisal. She walked through the house with a clipboard, professional and brisk, and I followed her quietly, while Joanna and Ethan sat on the couch pretending to watch TV but glaring at us every time we passed. When Valerie left, Joanna rounded on me. What was that? Who is she? What are you doing? I didn't answer. I just went upstairs and closed my door. The silence that followed was thick and charged, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. That night, long after midnight, I heard them arguing downstairs. Ethan's voice was harsh. You can't push him like this. He's not senile. He knows exactly what's going on. If he sells the house, we're screwed. Joanna's voice came back sharper, almost frantic. Then, we need to make him look like he can't handle it. If we can show he's losing it, we could get control. We could petition for guardianship. I've read about it. It happens all the time. My hands clenched around the blanket. They weren't just trying to nudge me out anymore. They were planning something worse. A legal maneuver to strip me of my own name, my own independence, my dignity. I knew then that whatever hesitation I had left, whatever sentimental loyalty was holding me back, had to end. They weren't protecting me. They weren't even pretending anymore. They were strategizing, scheming, plotting to take from me what I had built and what Elaine and I had preserved. They thought they could corner me into weakness, into silence, into surrender. But they had underestimated one thing. I had nothing left to lose but pride, and pride, once cornered, can become a blade. The next morning, I called Valerie and told her I wanted everything accelerated. No slow listings, no gentle delays. I wanted buyers lined up, contracts drawn, papers ready. I wanted this house, the house I had built with my own 2 hands, the house Elaine filled with laughter, the house they now corrupted into something unrecognizable. Sold, finalized, gone. And when it was gone, so too would be their illusion of control. For the rest of that week, I played the role of a quiet old man, shuffling about, nodding at Joanna's lectures, ignoring Ethan's dismissive sighs, smiling thinly at Cody's muttered remarks. They thought I had bent. They thought I had given up. But inside I was already gone, already free. Already watching the walls of this house prepare to close around them, not as a gift but as a trap, because when the papers arrived, when the sale was signed, when the new owners came with their moving trucks, Joanna would have no choice but to pack her things and leave, and in that moment she would understand too late what it meant to underestimate the man who built this place brick by brick, nail by nail, memory by memory. The day of reckoning came on a Saturday morning when the realtor arrived with the buyers. A young couple with 2 small children who were already running across the front lawn, laughing as if the place were theirs. I had scheduled the showing deliberately for the weekend, knowing everyone would be home. When Valerie pulled up in her sedan and the family followed her, Joanna was in the kitchen making coffee. She glanced out the window and saw them, and for a moment her face registered confusion, then dawning recognition, and then the kind of fury that burns without warning. She stormed into the hallway just as Valerie rang the bell, her voice sharp and cracking. What is going on? Who are these people? I stepped forward, calm, steady, holding the deed like a weapon. These, I said, are the potential new owners. I'm selling the house. Ethan appeared from the den, his jaw tightening, his face pale. Cody came halfway down the stairs, his earbuds dangling, staring in disbelief. Valerie, composed as ever, introduced herself to Joanna and Ethan as if nothing unusual were happening, explaining that she was here to show the property and that all arrangements had already been put in motion. Joanna turned to me, her voice shrill, trembling with rage. "You can't do this. This is our home. You can't just throw us out like this." And I answered her with the quiet finality of someone who had prepared every syllable. "This was never your home. It was mine, and you made it unlivable. You asked me to pay rent. Consider this my payment. I am selling it, and you will have 30 days to find somewhere else." The buyers walked through the house, their children darting into rooms that once held Elaine's voice and laughter, while Joanna trailed behind them, sputtering protests, trying to block doors, insisting there was some mistake. Ethan tried to maintain a veneer of civility, muttering about legal action, but Valerie silenced him with a crisp explanation of the deed, the ownership documents, the rights of sole proprietorship. Every word she spoke made Joanna's face twist further, until finally she turned on me, her voice breaking with fury and desperation. "How could you, after everything we've done for you, after all the patience, the care, the sacrifices, we took you in, and this is how you repay us?" For a moment I almost laughed at the inversion of truth, the way she had rewritten the story until I was the dependent and she the benefactor, but I kept my voice even. "You didn't take me in. I took you in. You came here because you failed, because you had nowhere else to go, and instead of gratitude, you gave me contempt. Instead of respect, you gave me ultimatums. You wanted me gone. Well, now you'll get your wish. You'll leave, but not with my dignity, not with my house, and not with the power you thought you had over me." Cody shifted uncomfortably, muttering something about not wanting to move, about friends and school, but Joanna silenced him with a glare, as if even in this moment her pride mattered more than her son's fear. Ethan tried one last tactic, pulling me aside near the staircase, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone. "Listen, Walter, we can work this out. You don't want to go through the hassle of moving at your age. Why don't we draw up an arrangement, transfer some things on paper, give you a comfortable stipend every month, and you can stay here in your own room until the end of your days. You'll never have to worry again. We'll handle everything." It was the clearest glimpse yet of their plan. Guardianship, control, financial stripping disguised as benevolence. And I felt something inside me harden like stone. I leaned in close and said with deliberate clarity, "You mistake me, Ethan. I am not a man who needs handling. I am a man who built this house, who buried his wife from this porch, who carried every debt and paid every tax. And I am a man who will not die as a guest in his own home. I am selling this place. You can take what dignity you have left and leave, or you can scream in the street like fools. It makes no difference to me." When the buyers left, Valerie assuring them she would follow up with paperwork, Joanna exploded. She screamed, shouted, hurled every accusation she could invent about ingratitude, about betrayal, even about Elaine, saying things designed to pierce me, to make me falter. "Do you know what Mom said about you?" she shrieked. "She told me how lonely she was with you, how you never really understood her, how she wished she had more than the life you gave her." For a moment, those words cut through me like ice. But then I saw the desperation in her eyes, the way she threw them not as truth but as weapons, twisting memory into poison. I straightened my back and answered, "Your mother loved me. We had 42 years together. Nothing you say can take that from me. You dishonor her by using her memory to wound me. That is your shame, not mine." She went silent for a moment, her mouth working but no words coming, and Ethan stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes full of cold hatred. Cody vanished up the stairs, slamming his door, leaving us in the heavy silence of a house that no longer belonged to any of us. That night, the three of them confronted me in the living room. Joanna's voice was raw from shouting, Ethan's jaw tight with suppressed rage, Cody silent but clearly shaken. They demanded I reverse the sale, demanded I sign over partial ownership, demanded I admit I wasn't capable of handling things anymore. I sat in Elaine's old rocking chair, the one piece they hadn't dared to move, and told them, simply and without heat, "It's done. The sale will go through. You will have to leave." Ethan stepped forward, fists clenched, but Joanna held him back, her voice cracking into something almost pleading. "Dad, please, don't do this. We're family. You don't want to die alone, do you?" And for the first time, I smiled. Not with triumph, not with cruelty, but with a kind of weary clarity. "I've been alone since your mother died, but I would rather be alone in peace than surrounded by family who treats me as a burden. You made your choice when you told me to pay rent or leave. I am choosing now. I am leaving you behind." The next morning, the papers were signed. The house, my house, the place I had built and preserved and endured in, was no longer mine, but neither was it theirs. It was gone to strangers who would fill it with new laughter, new photographs, new memories that had nothing to do with betrayal. As I packed my few belongings, Elaine's coat, a box of photographs, my father's toolbox, I felt not grief, but release. The walls that once echoed with love had become heavy with bitterness, and by letting them go, I felt lighter, as though Elaine herself was telling me it was time. When I walked out the front door for the last time, Joanna was standing at the top of the stairs, her face twisted with fury and something close to panic. She shouted after me, "You'll regret this. You'll die alone, and no one will remember you." I didn't turn back. I simply stepped into the sunlight, closed the door behind me, and walked to my car. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The weeks after the sale passed in a blur of boxes, signatures, and logistics. Yet beneath all of it ran a current of clarity I had not felt in years. I moved into a modest two-bedroom apartment near Clinton Lake, a quiet complex with wide balconies and neighbors who minded their own business, and though it was smaller than anything I had lived in since my 20s, it felt exactly right. The first morning I woke there, I brewed coffee on a cheap but reliable machine, spread out the newspaper I had reinstated, and opened the sliding door to let in the sound of waterfowl lifting from the lake. For the first time in 6 years since Elaine's death, the silence around me did not feel oppressive. It felt like space. Space to breathe, to remember, to exist without correction or criticism. I had packed only what mattered: her blue coat, the photo albums, the wooden clock, my father's tools, and the legal pad filled with my scrawled notes. Everything else I left behind, and in leaving it I discovered how little of it I truly needed. Joanna tried to reach me in the first week, sending angry messages, demanding explanations, alternating between threats of legal action and desperate appeals for reconciliation. I did not respond. Then came Ethan's emails, full of veiled threats about reputation, about how this looks to people who know you. I ignored those too. Cody sent one text, just one, late at night. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." I didn't mean what I said. I stared at it for a long time before answering with 4 words. "Be better than this." He never replied, and I doubt he will, but perhaps, someday, he will remember that moment when he has a house of his own and understands what it means to protect it. In the second week, I received a letter in the mail from Joanna, handwritten, the first in years. Her words were messy, uneven, a blend of anger and pleading, accusing me of betrayal and selfishness while begging me to reconsider, to give them one more chance. At the end, she wrote, "Without this house, we have nothing, Dad. You've destroyed us." I folded the letter neatly, placed it in the drawer under the clock, and whispered aloud to the empty room. "No, Joanna. You destroyed yourself when you forgot what family means." I did not reply. I would not fuel the fire. Some silences are louder than any words, and mine would echo in her louder than shouting ever could. Life began to take a new shape. I joined a walking group at the lake, other men and women my age who moved slowly but laughed freely. I volunteered one afternoon at the local library, repairing bindings, something I had not done in decades but which felt natural in my hands. On Sundays, I sat in the back pew of a small church, not out of obligation but because I wanted to hear the hymns Elaine once loved. I began to recognize a truth I had forgotten. Life does not end when children betray you, when homes are lost, when the past becomes unrecognizable. It continues, stubborn and insistent, offering chances for peace even in late chapters. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the lake, I stood on my balcony with a glass of lemonade. Real lemonade, tart and pulpy, and thought about Elaine. I thought about how she might laugh at me for selling the house we built, how she might tease me for being stubborn. But then I imagined her smile softening, her hand on mine, her voice saying, "You did what you had to do, Walter. You saved yourself." I felt her presence not in the walls I left behind, but in the air around me, in the quiet acceptance that she would have wanted me to live with dignity rather than rot in humiliation. The house is gone now, filled with new voices, new lives, and that is how it should be. I no longer drive past it, no longer haunt the street, no longer look for shadows of myself in the windows. It belongs to strangers, and in some ways that is the truest freedom of all, because what was poisoned has been buried, and what was sacred has been carried with me, not in wood or brick, but in memory. Joanna may rage, Ethan may scheme, Cody may one day understand, or he may not. None of it matters now. What matters is that I chose. I was not pushed, not stripped, not erased. I acted. I left with my dignity intact, and in doing so I reminded myself that a man, even an old man, still has the right to decide how his story ends. I sit now in a place that feels lighter, freer, more honest than any room I have known in years. My story is not over, not while breath still comes and morning still arrive with sunlight spilling over water, but the chapter with that house, with that betrayal, is closed. I hold no illusions about reconciliation. Some wounds do not heal. Some truths once revealed cannot be hidden again. But I have found something better than reconciliation. I have found peace, and peace at this age is the rarest victory of all.